Hey there, my fellow author. I'm Sarah Elizabeth Sawyer, an old soul kind of writer living my dream as a full-time author and authorpreneur. But I didn't start out living a confident, creative lifestyle. I struggled with the fears and the mental and emotional barriers that so often plague writers at all stages of their author career. But the truth is that with the right knowledge, tools, and training, you can overcome those barriers. I'm here to teach you how I've developed a lifestyle that's allowed me to publish 19 books and counting. Each week, as you tune into the Confident Fiction Author podcast, you'll get clarity on the steps you need to take to advance your writing career. Whether it's developing your ideal writing routine, tackling new skills like dictating your fiction, or overcoming the obstacles life throws your way, this podcast will help you live a more confident, creative lifestyle. Let's get started. Hey there, my fellow author, and welcome to this episode of the Confident Fiction Author podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Elizabeth Sawyer, and today we are going to be talking about dictating fiction on an airplane. This past week, I got back from a trip to Canada, my first time being there, went to Alberta, saw some marvelous things. I was actually up there for a video production and it snowed almost every day. One of the cool things that I got to do was right out the gate on the trip, and that was dictating 500 words on the flight up there. I'm going to tell you all about that experience, including what it was like to dictate while sitting in the middle seat, and just all of the general noise of being on an airplane and a flight that included bracing for an emergency landing. I will say this was not my first attempt at dictating on an airplane. I will share how my first experiment helped me succeed with my second one, despite everything. So let's get into it. The first time I attempted to dictate on an airplane was back in 2024, and my first nonfiction book, Otis W. Leader, The Ideal American Doughboy, had been selected to represent the state of Oklahoma at the Library of Congress's National Book Festival in Washington, D.C. So we were really excited, my mom and I, that we were able to go to that, which of course, us being from Texas, included a plane ride. I don't fly that often. The most flying I've done was 2 flights in 1 year. And my first few flights as an adult were just really uncomfortable, and flying, I decided, was not my favorite thing to do. But especially in the past few years, I've taken more plane trips and I've gotten more comfortable with the whole process. And I thought to myself there in 2024, as we were flying out to DC, that I was going to try to make some good use of the time of being cramped up on an airplane. I specifically set my intention to dictate a little bit of fiction. I wasn't going for word count. I was just going for the experience. I wanted to know, was it possible to dictate on an airplane? What were the pros and cons and pitfalls? And just troubleshoot it for future trips when I would want to get some words down while I was flying. From that trip, I learned that the first thing I wanted to do was get my device ready ahead of time. I wanted to make sure I could do offline dictation. So I went ahead and put my phone in airplane mode and just make sure that that words would still be captured in airplane mode before I even boarded the plane. Now, typically in the planes that I've been on, it's got the 3 seats. So you have the window seat, the middle seat, and then the aisle seat, which is what my mom prefers. And so I typically sit in that middle seat, which it wasn't something I was a fan of with dictating fiction. I felt like I had 2 people, one person on each side of me who might be able to hear my words, or I just felt really self-conscious, like I was highly visible in that middle seat. I don't know why, because you're not in a middle seat, but I just felt highly visible. And if I was going to really set the intention to dictate even several thousand words on an airplane, I would opt for the window seat. And that would give me the ability to just have some privacy, curl up almost in a corner, and not just have privacy, but just that sense of creativity and letting it spark my imagination by looking out the window and just going off into my story world. As it was, though, I was really just wanting the experience of dictating on an airplane. So from that middle seat, I dictated 33 words. Nothing earth shattering because, again, I didn't set an intention that I was going to dictate 500 words or 1,000 words or 3,000 words. I just wanted to get the experience so that I could say I dictated on an airplane. What that did, though, was set the foundation for future flights. When my next opportunity to try out dictation on an airplane, I was much more prepared. And that's what I want to say. If you are going to attempt to write fiction by dictation on an airplane, it really is all about preparation. You want to be mentally and emotionally prepared to dictate. It's not something that you get all settled in your seat and then you're like, okay, I've got 3 hours of just sitting here ahead of me, or 5 hours, 6 hours, whatever it is. I've got this time ahead of me. I think I'm going to write some fiction. That could happen. You could have that inspiration strike and just feel really comfortable. But for me, I needed to make the decision long before I ever got on the plane. Actually, back in my packing process, I was already getting ready for this. So I was mentally preparing myself, even visually walking myself through what would it look like to get into my seat, get settled. Would I wait till after takeoff or before takeoff to start dictating? Like, I was visualizing the whole thing. One of the things I did in my packing process through that visualizing what I would do is I made sure that I had my headset microphone. I went back and forth on this. Do I want the extra item in my bag because I like to travel really light and my headset microphone is a bit clunky? I really debated, do I even want to take that? And I kept seeing myself sitting there holding the phone up to my mouth, or maybe I would try my earbud mic, and it's not very good. And I knew I would not get good quality with that. I was going to do better with my headset microphone. In the end, I decided it would be worth the space it would take to pack that headset microphone in. That gave me the ability to be hands-free and to speak really quietly. I didn't have to worry about speaking in a normal tone with my voice. Like, I knew my mic was right there by my mouth, and even with all of the noise of the airplane and occasional other sounds going on, that I could just speak quietly and that headset microphone would pick it up for me. Oddly enough, I was in the middle seat once again. So I had my mother on one side, I had a gentleman on the other side who was not very talkative, so that worked out well. And once I got into dictating my scene, everything faded. I was not aware that I was in the middle seat or what other people around me were doing. I was able to get into my story flow and write some words. Another thing that you'll want to do if you are going to dictate on a flight is do a pre-flight check, just like the pilots do. You're going to want to run through your dictation process if you have one developed and make sure that everything is working before you get into your story flow. You want to make sure that your device is picking up your voice and accurately transcribing your words over the plane noise. So once the airplane actually takes off, you can do your own checklist and make sure that with all of that noise, it is picking up your words and transcribing them. I actually tried a record and transcribe app for this, and I wasn't a fan of how it was performing, and I had to pause it and transcribe the words like I wanted to see them on my screen. So I was dictating directly into my Scrivener app on my iPhone, and I could see the words transcribing on the screen as I was writing. So be sure and do that. Do a test on your dictation before you fully settle in to your writing session. My final lesson and recommendation for you is to dictate early in your flight. And I don't mean just as soon as you sit down, because there is a lot of other things going on. You're going through the safety demonstration and the pilot's making announcements, and there's a lot of other chatter and even some movement going around inside the plane as people are settling in. So for me, I waited until we were airborne and things had quieted down as far as other audio going on before I got into writing my words. But I did get into it not long after takeoff, because I knew if I allowed myself to venture into the onboard entertainment or reading a book or just sitting there too long, I would talk myself out of dictating on the plane. You can do it later or maybe on the next flight, because we had to take 2 flights to reach Canada. And I could have talked myself into, let me just settle in for an hour. This is going to be a 2.5-hour flight. Let me just settle in for a while and chill out after all the hustle and bustle of the airport and getting loaded, maybe take a little snooze. And I just told myself, nope, just like at home, get your words in first thing. That way they are not following you around all day. Or in my case, I didn't want them following me around on this flight the whole time. I settled myself in, did my pre-flight check, ran through all of my paces with dictation, made sure everything was working, reviewed my outline, and then I started writing. And like I said, I was very quickly swept away in the story and became unaware of what was going on around me. I did not get very far. I wrote about 500 words, which for me felt like a huge achievement. For all of my discomfort with flying over the years, to have been comfortable enough in that space to write an entire 500 words was monumental, and it was so empowering. I knew if I did it this time and I got that 500 words in, I could do it again. Now, I did mention that emergency landing, and this was perhaps the biggest reason why I was grateful I got that 500 words in before we approached the Denver airport, because as we were making that approach, the pilot came on and announced that they'd had some mechanical difficulties. He was sounding all cheerful. Everything's good. The fire trucks are going to meet us when we land, but it's no big deal. Everything's under control. Just sit back and relax and listen to the flight attendants as they give you instructions to prepare for this emergency landing. It really hit when the flight attendant came on and asked everyone to take out their safety booklet from the seat back in front of them and follow along, and to find the section about bracing, because we would be coming to a very fast, very sudden stop once we landed. At that point, they had everyone's attention, and we were all studying that safety manual like never before and practicing getting in the brace position that was illustrated in there. My palms were starting to break out in a sweat, especially when we continued to circle. And we actually circled for about 30 minutes, which is never a good sign. Are they burning out fuel so that we're not such a big fireball when we land? All of the things are going through your mind. I asked the gentleman next to me, I was like, "Are you a praying man?" And he said, "Oh, yes, ma'am, I am." We continued circling, and then we did finally come in for a landing. We braced. It turned out to be one of the smoothest landings I've experienced, and we did come to a stop, but it wasn't really an abrupt stop, and the entire plane broke out in applause, and we all breathed really deeply. My mother and I, before that happened, only had 45 minutes to make our connecting flight, so we ran 10 gates down, and we just barely got on our next flight. After all of that, all I wanted to do was eat the cookies that were in my backpack and watch a TV show. That's pretty much all I did for the second flight that I had planned and hoped to get more dictation in. I certainly hope that you never experience an emergency landing or having to brace for landing, but that's just an example of unexpected disruptions you could face on your flight. So do get your writing in, your dictating done before the snack trays come through or any kind of landing announcements. If you are a frequent flyer or you have a flight trip coming up and you're thinking about dictating some fiction, just know that your first attempt may not be a stellar success. That certainly was the case for me when I got that 33 words in on my flight to DC. But it wasn't supposed to be a stellar success. Your experiments with dictation build on each other. They are to lay the groundwork for future dictation success. That's something I want you to remember if you haven't been successful with dictating your fiction much in the past period. Just know little attempts prepare you for greater success. If you aren't actively dictating your fiction, there are so many benefits to it. It turns that dead time into creative time, just like on a plane. And even with all the noise going on, you can capture bits of your story. Dictation can be just a fun adventure in finding opportunities to write in unusual places. But if dictation feels daunting to you, especially if it's the tools of dictation that trip you up, I talked about my headset mic and dictating directly into Scrivener and recording and transcribing. If all of that sounds overwhelming, I do have a dictation bootcamp coming up at the end of April 2026 that I would love to see you in. We are going to be talking all about tools and getting your tech set up so that you can successfully dictate fiction wherever you are. Enrollment is not quite open yet for that dictation bootcamp, so be sure that you are on the waiting list over at fictioncourses.com/dictation bootcamp. Dictation is truly a skill that gives you flexibility, whether you're on an airplane, in a waiting room, just about anywhere. Wherever you find yourself, you might be surprised that your words are there waiting for you. That's all for this week's episode, my friend. I hope it was encouraging and inspiring for you. I'll see you in the next episode of the Confident Fiction Author Podcast. Take care.